Put your phone or device aside as you listen into this audio story. Best for when you're on the move, resting, or going to bed at night. We release new stories daily. Like and subscribe to not miss out. On November 30th, 2022, a team of engineers pressed a button that would change the world forever. Within 5 days, 1 million people had signed up for something that wasn't supposed to exist yet. Within 2 months, 100 million. But what the public saw as a technological miracle, insiders knew as something else entirely. The culmination of the most audacious power play in Silicon Valley history. A story of broken promises, backroom betrayals, and a non-profit that became worth billions while technically owning nothing. This is the dark business story behind ChatGPT and the man who built an empire by claiming he wanted to save humanity. The question isn't how it succeeded. The question is, what was sacrificed to make it happen, and whether anyone who knew the truth tried to stop it. The story begins not in 2022, but in 2015, in a private room where the world's most powerful tech billionaires gathered to discuss something they called an existential threat. Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, Jessica Livingston. The guest list read like a Silicon Valley shadow council. Their fear was specific. Google's DeepMind was advancing too quickly in artificial intelligence, accumulating too much power, moving towards something they believed could either save or destroy civilization. In that room, they made a decision that would reshape the business of technology. They would build a counterweight, an artificial intelligence laboratory that would be different from every company that came before it. It would be a non-profit, open source, democratic, safe. They called it OpenAI, and the name itself was the promise. The charter they published was extraordinary in its idealism. The benefits of artificial intelligence should be distributed broadly. Concentrated power was dangerous. They would never pursue profit at the expense of safety. Elon Musk pledged to donate up to $1 billion. Sam Altman, then president of the legendary startup accelerator Y Combinator, would lead it. The media called it visionary. The tech world called it naive. What almost no one called it was what it actually was. The opening move in the most sophisticated corporate scandal in modern business history. Sam Altman was 30 years old when he took control of OpenAI. By Silicon Valley standards, he was already a veteran of the entrepreneurship game. He'd sold his first startup, Looped, for $43 million at age 27. He'd risen to run Y Combinator, the most powerful startup factory in the world, funding companies that would become worth hundreds of billions. But those who knew him well understood something the public didn't. Sam Altman's ambition was never about money. It was about legacy, about being remembered as the person who shaped the future of human civilization. He'd once written a blog post describing his philosophy. Power accumulates to those who can coordinate large groups toward ambitious goals. OpenAI would be his laboratory for testing that theory. The early days were exactly what the charter promised. OpenAI published its research openly, shared its code, operated as a non-profit dedicated to the collective good. They hired the best researchers from Google, Facebook, and academia, offering them something money alone couldn't buy: the chance to work on artificial intelligence without the constraints of corporate profit motives. The team was small, brilliant, and united by genuine belief in the mission. But beneath the surface, tensions were already forming, building cutting-edge AI. I wasn't cheap. The computing power alone cost millions per month. The salaries required to compete with Google and Facebook were staggering. And Elon Musk, despite his billion-dollar pledge, was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the company and Sam Altman's leadership style. By 2018, the cracks were visible. Musk wanted OpenAI to merge with Tesla to ensure he maintained control over the AI development he'd helped fund. Altman refused. The disagreement wasn't just about corporate structure, it was about power, control, and competing visions for who should guide humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence. In February 2018, Elon Musk resigned from OpenAI's board. The official statement cited conflicts of interest with Tesla's AI work. But people inside the organization knew the truth. It was a betrayal that would echo for years. Musk had wanted to control OpenAI's destiny. Altman had outmaneuvered him. And now, with Musk's billions walking out the door, OpenAI faced an existential crisis. They were burning through hundreds of millions of dollars. They were nowhere near their goals. And the non-profit structure that had been their moral advantage was becoming their financial death sentence. What happened next is where the dark business thriller truly begins. In March 2019, Sam Altman announced a radical restructuring that shocked the tech world. OpenAI would create a for-profit subsidiary, capped at returning 100 times any investment. It was, they claimed, a necessary evolution, the only way to raise the billions needed to compete with Google and Facebook. The non-profit would maintain control, ensuring the mission remained intact. But corporate lawyers and business analysts immediately recognized what was actually happening. This was one of the most sophisticated wealth extraction mechanisms ever designed. The non-profit owned the for-profit subsidiary. The for-profit subsidiary could raise billions and make investors rich. But technically, officially, legally, the organization's primary obligation remained to humanity, not shareholders. It was a structure that let them have it both ways: the moral authority of a non-profit and the financial firepower of a Silicon Valley unicorn. Microsoft saw the opportunity immediately. In July 2019, they invested $1 billion. But the deal was far more complex than the headlines suggested. Microsoft didn't just invest money. They invested computing infrastructure, Azure cloud credits, the kind of resources that would normally cost tens of billions to build independently. In exchange, Microsoft got exclusive licensing rights to OpenAI's technology. They could integrate it into their products, monetize it, build it into Office and Windows, and every corner of their software empire. OpenAI remained independent in name, but the reality was darker. They were now financially dependent on Microsoft, technologically dependent on Microsoft's infrastructure, and contractually obligated to give Microsoft everything they created. The non-profit that promised to distribute AI's benefits broadly had just given exclusive access to one of the most powerful corporations on Earth. Inside OpenAI, researchers began to leave, some quietly, citing vague reasons, others more dramatically, with public statements about safety concerns and mission drift. The departures included some of the organization's most respected scientists. Dario Amodei, OpenAI's VP of Research, left to found Anthropic, explicitly citing disagreements over safety and commercialization. He took 11 other senior researchers with him. It was a brain drain that would have destroyed most companies. But Sam Altman had a different strategy: replace ideology with execution. He hired engineers who cared less about the philosophical questions and more about shipping products. People who understood that in Silicon Valley, the winners weren't those with the purest intentions. They were those who shipped first. The technology they were building was advancing faster than anyone outside the organization understood. GPT-2, released in 2019, was so powerful that OpenAI initially refused to release the full model, citing safety concerns about potential misuse. It could write coherent paragraphs, mimic human writing styles, generate fake news articles indistinguishable from real journalism. The decision to withhold it generated massive publicity and positioned OpenAI as the responsible guardian of dangerous technology. But insiders knew the real calculation. They were learning how to manufacture scarcity, how to turn safety concerns into marketing advantages. GPT-3, released in 2020, was a quantum leap forward. 175 billion parameters, trained on nearly 1 trillion words, capable of writing code, composing poetry, answering questions, holding conversations that felt eerily human. And this time, OpenAI didn't release it as open source. They put it behind an API, charged developers to access it, and created a business model that would generate hundreds of millions in revenue. The non-profit that promised openness had built the most closed, controlled, monetized AI system in the world. But even with GPT-3's success, the general public still didn't understand what OpenAI was building. The technology remained in the hands of developers, researchers, businesses with API access. Inside OpenAI's San Francisco headquarters, a small team was working on something different. Not an API for developers, a product for everyone. An interface so simple that anyone with an internet connection could access the most powerful language model ever created. They called it ChatGPT, and even the people building it didn't fully understand what they were about to unleash. The internal projections were modest, maybe a few 100,000 users in the first year if they were lucky. The goal was to gather data, refine the model, learn how people actually wanted to interact with AI. No one, not even Sam Altman, predicted what would actually happen. November 30th, 2022. OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public with almost no marketing, no press releases, just a simple announcement on their website. Within hours, Twitter exploded with people sharing screenshots of conversations with the AI. It could explain complex topics, write essays, debug code, compose poems, answer questions, engage in philosophical debates. It made mistakes, hallucinated facts, occasionally said bizarre things. But none of that mattered. For the first time in history, ordinary people could access artificial intelligence that felt genuinely intelligent. Day 1, 100,000 users. Day 5, 1 million. Day 60, 100 million. It was the fastest product adoption in the history of technology, faster than Facebook, faster than Instagram, faster than TikTok. ChatGPT wasn't just a product. It was a cultural phenomenon, a technological earthquake, a glimpse into a future that most people hadn't believed would arrive for decades. Behind the scenes, chaos. OpenAI's servers were crashing under the load. Microsoft was scrambling to provide more computing capacity. The costs were astronomical. Every conversation with ChatGPT required massive computational resources, pennies per interaction, that multiplied into millions per day. But Sam Altman understood something crucial. They'd just achieved something that money alone couldn't buy. They'd captured the world's attention. Every tech company on Earth was now scrambling to catch up, and OpenAI had a lead measured in years, not months. Google, which had been developing similar technology for years, but kept it locked inside the company out of safety concerns and fear of reputational damage, suddenly looked slow and timid. Meta, Amazon, every major tech giant was suddenly racing to announce their own AI initiatives. But they were already too late. OpenAI had won the race to public consciousness. And then, just when the victory seemed complete, the first darkness appeared. Here's the truth that the celebrations obscured. ChatGPT was hemorrhaging money. By some estimates, OpenAI was spending $700,000 per day just to keep ChatGPT running for free users. The company was burning through hundreds of millions with no clear path to profitability. Sam Altman needed more money, vast amounts of money, the kind of money that would make the Microsoft deal look small. And in January 2023, just 2 months after ChatGPT's launch, Microsoft made their move. $10 billion, the largest AI investment in history. But this time, the terms were even more favorable to Microsoft. 49% of OpenAI's for-profit subsidiary, rights to 75% of profits until Microsoft recouped its investment. then a permanent 49% stake, even after OpenAI theoretically achieved artificial general intelligence. The non-profit that promised to distribute AI's benefits broadly had just sold half the company to Microsoft in everything but name. The business implications were staggering. If OpenAI succeeded, if ChatGPT became the interface through which billions of people accessed information, Microsoft would control the gateway to the future of computing. Every search query, every document written, every piece of code generated would flow through their infrastructure. It was the kind of monopolistic positioning that would have been illegal if anyone understood what was actually happening. But the regulatory apparatus designed to check corporate power was decades behind the technology. By the time governments figured out what OpenAI and Microsoft had built, the architecture of the future would already be locked in place. And Sam Altman, he remained CEO of the non-profit that controlled the for-profit subsidiary that was now worth tens of billions. Officially, he owned 0%. Officially, he was motivated purely by the mission. But anyone who understood how power actually works in Silicon Valley knew that equity was only one form of wealth. Control was another. Legacy was another. And Altman now controlled the most important technology company of the 21st century. He sat on corporate boards worth billions. He had investment positions in hundreds of startups. He had become one of the most powerful people in technology without technically owning the company that made him powerful. It was wealth extraction perfected to an art form. All the power of ownership without any of the legal exposure. But the real scandal, the truly dark secret at the heart of this business story, was only beginning to emerge. In the spring of 2023, whispers started circulating among AI researchers about something called the safety tax. Inside OpenAI, there had always been two competing factions. Those focused on advancing AI capabilities as quickly as possible, and those focused on ensuring the technology remained safe and aligned with human values. For years, the safety team had meaningful influence. But after ChatGPT's explosion, after Microsoft's $10 billion investment, after the race with Google and every other tech giant intensified, the balance shifted. Safety research took longer. It slowed down product releases. It cost money without generating immediate returns. And in the new OpenAI, the one that was simultaneously a non-profit dedicated to humanity and a for-profit company worth tens of billions, speed mattered more than caution. Former employees began speaking out carefully through intermediaries and anonymous channels. They described pressure to ship products faster than safety testing recommended. They described safety concerns being overruled by business imperatives. They described a culture where questioning the mission was treated as betrayal. Most damning of all, they described contractual agreements that prevented them from speaking publicly about safety concerns without forfeiting vested equity worth millions of dollars. The non-profit that claimed to prioritize humanity over profit had built legal mechanisms to silence critics. When journalists investigated these claims, OpenAI's response was carefully calibrated. Not denial, but redirection. They pointed to their safety research papers, their alignment teams, their public commitments. They invited regulators to tour their facilities. They published blog posts about responsible AI development. But they never addressed the fundamental contradiction. How could an organization truly prioritize safety when its survival depended on winning a race against competitors who might not share those values? The answer, uncomfortable and increasingly obvious, was that they couldn't. OpenAI had become exactly what it was founded to prevent: a concentrated locus of AI power, financially dependent on a major corporation, racing to deploy technology before fully understanding its implications. The non-profit structure that was supposed to ensure accountability had become a legal shield protecting a for-profit enterprise worth billions. The commitment to openness had transformed into one of the most closed, secretive AI development programs in the world. The promise to distribute benefits broadly had concentrated wealth and control in the hands of Microsoft and a small circle of insiders. Every single founding principle had been inverted, and Sam Altman, the man who'd promised to save humanity from the dangers of artificial intelligence, had built a machine that embodied every fear he'd originally claimed to protect against. By mid-2023, OpenAI was being valued at nearly $90 billion. ChatGPT had over 100 million weekly active users. GPT-4, released in March, was even more powerful, capable of passing the bar exam, scoring in the top percentile on standardized tests, engaging in complex reasoning that seemed to approach human-level intelligence in certain domains. The technology was extraordinary. The business success was undeniable. But the moral foundation had rotted away completely. The question that researchers, ethicists, and competitors were now asking wasn't whether OpenAI would succeed. It was what would happen to humanity when they did. The lessons from OpenAI's explosion are darker than the business press typically acknowledges. First, in the entrepreneurship game of power and greed, idealism is a weapon. The non-profit structure gave OpenAI moral authority that for-profit competitors couldn't match, attracted talent that money alone couldn't buy, and created a narrative that protected them during their most vulnerable years. But it was always a strategic tool, not a genuine constraint. Second, in business, he who ships first wins. Google had better technology, more resources, and more researchers. But they hesitated, paralyzed by reputational risk and safety concerns. OpenAI shipped ChatGPT despite its flaws and captured the market before competitors understood what was happening. Third, the structure of corporate power in Silicon Valley has evolved beyond traditional capitalism. Sam Altman controls tens of billions in value without technically owning equity. Microsoft effectively controls OpenAI without technically acquiring it. The wealth and power are real, but they flow through legal structures designed to obscure accountability. And finally, the darkest lesson. When the stakes are high enough, when the technology is powerful enough, every company becomes what it feared. OpenAI was founded by people genuinely worried about AI concentration. They built the exact system they warned against, not through malice, but through the inexorable logic of competition. In a race where second place means obsolescence, safety becomes unaffordable. Principles become liabilities. The mission to save humanity transforms into the mission to win. As of today, ChatGPT remains the most widely used AI system in human history. Hundreds of millions of people interact with it daily. It's being integrated into education, business, creative work, research, every corner of modern life. Sam Altman has become one of the most influential people on Earth, testifying before Congress, meeting with world leaders, shaping the regulatory environment for the technology he helped create. Microsoft's investment has already returned billions in market value. The business success is complete. But late at night, in private conversations, former OpenAI researchers share a different story. They talk about the models that are coming, systems more powerful than GPT-4, approaching capabilities that even their creators don't fully understand. They talk about safety testing that gets abbreviated when release schedules demand it. They talk about a company that's now too big to fail, too important to regulate effectively, too fast-moving for democratic oversight to keep pace. They talk about the moment they realized that the organization founded to ensure AI benefited humanity had become the thing they most feared. An intelligence explosion happening in private, behind closed doors, controlled by a corporation and a man whose greatest talent was convincing the world that his ambitions and humanity's interests were the same. The birth of ChatGPT wasn't just a product launch, It was the moment that artificial intelligence escaped from the laboratory and entered the bloodstream of human civilization. And the man who released it, the non-profit that claimed to be different, the corporate structure designed to protect humanity, all of it was built on a foundation of contradictions that may define the future of human existence. Sam Altman once wrote that the most important question about AI wasn't whether it would be powerful, but who would control it. He never mentioned that he'd already decided the answer was himself. That was always the real secret, hidden in plain sight from the very beginning. Some files were never meant to stay closed, and some men who promise to save the world are really just building a throne. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.